We got some pretty amazing things happening in this episode called My Sweet Boy. And with me today is Kinte, who's going to be co hosting and talking about all things the terror.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this episode tonight. I know we're a little late. Hopefully, the next episode we will be more on time with.
I feel sort of like this episode sometimes it takes a little while because you get lost in the ether. So we'll say that that's what happened to us.
Okay.
And yeah, we'll see what happens. So I am going to start out by saying that this episode, although some people really didn't like it, I really enjoyed this episode a lot for a number of different reasons that sort of took me off guard. But before I talk about what I was thinking about it, what did you think? What did you think about just the overall premise of Chester heading into the afterlife and what that might mean in terms of where things are looking like they're going to end up?
I'll be honest with you, it was okay. I didn't hate it. I didn't love it. I just felt like it was all right. And remember, I thought this was the season finale, and I was thinking like this is not a very good season finale. But I guess it didn't feel like a season finale, and the reason why is because it was not one.
Yes, to everyone who listened last week and was, I'm sorry, led astray by me saying that it was the season finale. I am so sorry. I don't even know what I was thinking, but no, it definitely wasn't the season finale. And good thing it wasn't, because there would have been a lot of hanging open storylines going on there.
Uh-huh.
So okay, just you weren't super excited about it, and you didn't hate it. Was there anything about this episode that you liked more than you didn't like?
I liked C. Thomas Howell getting beat down.
That
was pretty awesome.
That was actually pretty awesome. I have to say, that must have been a really tough role to step into, mostly because I'm sure they knew where things were going, right? And to know that you're going to end up in the position that he ends up in, it must have been a tough pill to sort of go through and not sort of be the big tough guy, all that bluster and stuff that's around. There's no redeeming him at this point. He's pretty much irredeemable. I kind of feel bad for him, actually, but awesome performance. You're right, absolutely awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. Just to be honest, I never really saw him as like this great actor, but as he's gotten older, talking about C. Thomas Howell, and maybe I just was, maybe he just didn't get the opportunities. But in this, he's really good, and I've seen him in some other things too, where I felt like that he did a good job. So, kudos to him.
It's funny. Later in people's acting careers, sometimes I feel like they are sort of like, well, I have nothing to lose, and I don't mean that in a I'm giving up way. I mean that in a very serious, look, I've acted my whole life. I know what this is all about. I really have nothing to lose. I'm just going to give it everything. And it's quite interesting what results that sort of brings in, because you're right. And it does feel like he's really playing that all the way to the end. It does not feel like he's holding anything back. You're right. I actually really like him too.
Remember, he did one of the worst freaking movies of all time. Soul Man.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, man. If a movie can be charged with a crime.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that was pretty bad. Yeah. I agree. Well, one of my favorite parts of this episode, if we're going to deconstruct everything to sort of go through it really quick. I mean, one of the things that in the beginning, of course, we see that Chester has decided to stay. They sort of have what feels like an uneasy relationship. He and Luce have kind of an uneasy relationship. And eventually throughout the episode, obviously they get much closer. And it does feel like they've reconciled on some level. I don't know on what level that is, but it does feel like they've reconciled in some way. We see
Uh-huh.
so much of this episode relates to Chester's search for his twin. Um, and I'll get to what happens at the camp in a minute, but I'm going to stick with Chester and Luce for a second. This idea that Luce is somehow a not a foil, but I guess I'd call her a threshold guardian. She is absolutely um, the person that kind of holds Chester back from maybe his not his bad self, but his most spontaneous ideas. And each time that she tries to hold him back, he continues to go forward and says, no, I'm going to totally do this. And I mean, we see that when she tries to tell him not to go off to be the translator. And then, we definitely see it here when she says, look, why are you going to go do this seance thing? This doesn't even make any sense to me. You shouldn't do it. And he just barges right ahead and does it anyway. Something that I find so fascinating about this episode is this mixture between the sort of abuela's idea of the dead and how she transports him, and Chester's obvious. That's not his mythology or his spirituality, I should say. It's not his spirituality. This isn't where he's coming from. And the fact that they are able to crisscross lines is sort of a little bit of awesome, right? Because it's kind of like putting the supernatural realm in the terror above everything else. Look, it doesn't matter what you believe or whether you believe in something on a different level. What matters is this stuff exists, and there are all different ways to channel what's going on here. I really liked that. I thought that was kind of amazing. So just to kind of wrap up where we were with Chester and Luce, though, when Chester crosses over, did you even like the seance? Not the seance, but did you like the ceremony, that basically the ritual that brings him back to the world of where his twin is?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was pretty cool. That was a good element of the show.
I thought it was really clever on a number of different levels that, he shows up at a playground. He can clearly tell that, his brother didn't survive. But what's interesting also on that level is that somehow Yuko follows Chester into that world to get his twin. Because we know, just sort of as a narrative timeline, that Chester's twin died many, many, many years ago. And so the fact that Yuko didn't sort of put two and two together, I guess not put two and two together, but wasn't able to get to Chester's twin, I think says something about Chester, right? Somehow the supernatural element that's around Chester allowed Yuko to sort of attach on or get a foothold in, and that's how she was able to find his twin. That was really fascinating to me. What did you think?
No, I agree. I think that one thing that this show does is they do a great job of really giving you these elements that I'm sure many people, or maybe I shouldn't even say this, or may not be aware of, as far as the cultural stuff.
Right.
And so, once again, I have to say that these are things that I'd heard of, but not necessarily was familiar with.
Right.
And it really, that is when I think sometimes the show is at its best, is when it like takes you into this world.
Yeah, there's this very old sort of understanding about pictures of a person, and how pictures of a person can capture a little bit of their soul. And we saw something very similar when Chester's mom cuts Chester's hair before he goes off to be the translator and says, I'm sorry, Luce asks why she needed that. And then we get the explanation that if he dies, then, a little piece of him is here and then he can have a proper burial. Well, an interesting aspect is that there's also that same kind of sort of understanding in pictures, where pictures are considered to be, they capture a piece of a person's soul. And so I found that piece to be so fascinating because the ritual itself, right, was sort of, it had to do with Chester's brother's picture. It had to do with the ceremonial circle, the candles, the just all the little things made that that little piece really, really rich and very epic. So not to get too far off, but I really wanted to know what you thought of Chester's interaction with his twin.
Oh, I thought it was cool. I thought it was really good, and it was very emotional. Didn't you find? Didn't you get that?
I did. It was very emotional. I mean, on the one hand, we know that Chester now knows that his twin is dead. So, I mean, there's no coming back from that. On the other hand, it felt almost like there was a sense of closure. And that is brought into stark relief the piece that happens after, where Yuko basically comes in and says, "I'm your mom." And then when they disappear, of course, the sand, right? When they disappear into the sandbox, it definitely felt like I can't tell if what was happening there was Yuko is still pining for Taizo Chester, or whether this is something different, that she really just wants to be someone's mom. And, oh, look, Chester brought me to another way that I can be a mom. I haven't quite figured that out. Do you have any insight on that?
No, you were really good because no, I'm gonna sound like a caveman. No, I don't have no insight really on that. And you know what? If I did have, I'm not gonna even pretend. Like I said, I watch this show very passively, so which is probably not great for podcasting, but I watch it very passively. So I'm, most shows I'm pretty much, even without trying to figure out what's going to happen next. Whereas this show, maybe it's a good thing. I'm kind of just along for the ride. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a very valid way to watch, especially this season, because it is very it's less sort of the known, especially me being, a person who lives in sort of the Western realm of mythology and ritual. And I also have a very difficult time, even with some of the stuff that I feel like I should know, that borders on, okay, this is very Eastern. There's so much Eastern ritual in it. There's so much mythology that I have no idea about. And so you end up looking at things very passively, simply because there isn't enough information to kind of process through what else might be happening. But from a story perspective, I think that they do a really good job of keeping it fairly tight. So I appreciate that. There's been a few episodes that I feel like were a little bit of misplaced. There was sort of misplaced that in terms of just how they expressed what was happening for us. Like it didn't quite meet the mark in terms of giving us enough information to go forward. But then later in later episodes, they'll come back and all of a sudden some things will start making way more sense. I mean, things that happened in that very first scene didn't even make sense until somewhere midway through the season. So that I feel like that's just sort of how you have to approach the show. You sort of can't approach it like you're an analytic sleuth who's going to figure out all the puzzle pieces, because the puzzle pieces are like, they're shapeless, and you just kind of have to watch the picture to be able to see how it's going to unfold. But having said that, I just going back to Chester and his interaction with his twin. Something that also not bothered me, but just sort of like really visibly shook me was understanding that Chester is now basically completely absorbed by a world that I don't feel like he had any ability to understand or even process before. And he has just completely been, like I said, absorbed by it, right? And it's a strange sense of someone going from, oh my gosh, I don't really know that much about this, or I, don't really believe it. I've just heard all of the little ritual pieces. I've heard all of the stories, but I don't really believe them, to fully embracing them and taking a trip basically into the afterlife, right?
Right.
Is that surprising to you as well?
Uh, not really. No.
No.
I don't know. Like, I do feel like with this show, when you have like a preconceived notion of what's gonna happen or what's gonna, well, don't get me wrong. Sometimes it's totally that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I gotta give this show credit for, definitely there's been times where I'm like, didn't see that one coming.
Right.
So yeah.
Well, so toward the end of the encounter, I guess all the ritual encounter with Chester and his brother, the thing that we see, and the reason that I brought up the idea about the soul being a part of the picture, is because what we see, and the reason that we know that Yuko now has him in the afterlife, is that his brother is now missing from the picture.
Right. Yeah.
And so that is sort of a big, and the other thing that's so interesting about this is that, this is how Chester figures out if you're a Yuri. He, sees that you're distorted in the picture and that kind of stuff. Like there's almost a whole other element to all of this with the photography and, not exactly spirit imaging, but something really close. There's some fascinating ideas around there. Okay, so the I guess the other sort of, before we go on to the camp real quick, the other thing that was sort of interesting was Doña Maria, right? Who is the older lady that came over and was talking with the abuela and stuff like that. Why was she holding a onesie? Basically, she had made a onesie, and why was she holding that? Clearly, she wasn't alive anymore. What was going on with that? We know Yuko must still be thinking that she is going to get a baby, right?
Right.
I don't think that Yuko thought that she was going to get Chester's twin. I don't think that that's what she thought. You know what I mean?
Oh, so you thought that it was gonna be something else?
Well, see, okay. First of all, Doña Maria, I mean, it's complicated for me, but Doña Maria seemed like an odd choice for Yuko to possess. Very odd. But I understand sort of why that was the choice. What was strange was, why was she knitting the onesie if Yuko, I guess if Yuko thought that she was going to have something else out of it, something doesn't make sense. There isn't enough information, I think, is the key. There just isn't enough information quite yet to understand what else might be happening. Simply because, but that seemed very purposeful for her to have that. That doesn't seem like an accident,
No, definitely not.
Grandma doesn't just go around knitting onesies for, altruism ideas or something. It just seems like, yeah, there's got to be something to that. Okay, so let's go to the camp real quick, and let's talk about what happened there. So one thing that was sort of interesting was the idea that Chester's mom and dad have left, and they have gone off to be someone's gardener, basically. and now a lot of them have actually left. They have chosen or gotten something called sponsors, and that lets them leave the camp. And it's kind of a nice segue into how our government, how the military decided that people were safe again. It was like, well, we have to bring you back into society. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it by having someone sponsor you, be your, if anything goes wrong, you're responsible for these people. To me, that was just, in some ways, it was really heartbreaking. Just knowing that, people that have as much pride as these people do are now completely dependent on the goodwill of their sponsors. I don't know. That one sort of really hit me. But what I wasn't surprised about was the way that Major Bowen went off the rails with Amy.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's been building ever since her mom introduced her to Major Bowen. And I'm not really sure that there was any way that something like this wasn't going to happen. That sounds really crazy, but honestly, the character of Major Bowen is so off the rails that like it felt like something had to snap, right?
Right, yeah.
Now,
so is his actions purely because of possession, or?
So I'm sort of two minds here, right? On the one hand, I think he was probably always a bit of a hard-nosed kind of person, and I think he believed in what he was doing.
Uh-huh.
But then I think that the supernatural touched him in such a way that it fractured his ability to see things clearly and without a, if you will, a distortion, right? Because I mean, like, if you think back to how people are pictured when you see them as the Yuri, right? What you're seeing is sort of a distorted image of who they are. And I feel like that is a manifestation inside out as well, where there's like this distorted sense of reality and you're you, but you're not quite you. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Yeah.
So knowing that, one of the things that makes Major Bowen so terrifying, I think, is that he isn't under the influence of anything supernatural anymore. And his behavior is just as horrifying as just about anything Yuko has done. And the two of those things in stark contrast are, it's amazing how much more similar they are than you would want them to be. I mean, it seems like they should be so different from each other, and yet, wow, they really aren't. So I feel like that was really interesting. I also think that this idea of a prisoner within a prison camp is also, there's something so meta about that line, that storyline, that it almost feels like there's another story inside of that story.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that you can be free on the outside but not on the inside is also just a really interesting piece of narrative that I think is happening or happened with the Bowen storyline, where he was really a prisoner himself, and he keeps manifesting, or no, I shouldn't say manifesting, he keeps projecting out his lack of control over the situation by trying to control other people, because he has no control anymore. And the things like that have become, to me, one of the really interesting and difficult to sort of digest, but very important aspects of this series. There's just so many little details about how not just people lived in the Japanese internment camps, but also what the ramifications were to both the people in the camps, their captors, the people around them. It's not cut and dry. It's not just sort of a one size fits all. It is one size fits all in terms of the morality of it, but it's not one size fits all in terms of who the people were and the complexity of what was happening. It's so multifaceted. So I have to give the show a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, and to wrap it into this kind of storyline and this kind of supernatural. You have to serve many masters.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. One thing though, okay, so the thing that I really enjoyed the most was Amy's ultimate revenge.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no way that you couldn't possibly just love Amy's revenge is the best word I can even think of, but it was more than revenge. It was like there's a sense of just absolute justice about what happened there. That was, I mean, that was over the top and crazy, but good, really good. And then, so the last piece that I want to just sort of touch on before we go is clearly we know that Luz is pregnant, right?
Right.
Okay. So, and I mean, and that obviously might play into Abuela's friend, Donna Maria. It might play into why she had the onesie. I don't know, but I'm wondering if this is all just a lure for Chester and Luz, because we know that we've been told now through Yuko's sort of story that the only way that she can bring anybody into the afterlife is if they are of her blood, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and her, want for a baby is a big deal. But I am wondering if everything that hasn't happened with Yuko in the past couple of episodes isn't maybe not very well thought out. It feels very chaotic on Yuko's part, and I have a feeling that that's intentional. Like, I think that they are purposefully trying to make us understand that the Yuri is not about an intellectual ideology, or that there, is some kind of philosophy that sort of stands behind the Yuri, but that the Yuri is kind of a chaotic, needy spirit that is simply not one-minded, but singularly focused. And it just, no matter what, she is just going to keep going and keep going until she gets what she wants. Now, what that means for the next episode or two is sort of up in the air, but I have a feeling that in the end, Yuko might get more than we anticipate that she's going to get. So I think I'll just leave it there. Do you have any, what are your thoughts? Do you have any closing thoughts? What do you think?
No, my closing thought is, well, tonight is the next episode. So I think that, I'm just, my whole thing is like, where is this going? And is it going to be somewhere that we want to get to? So
I think it will be somewhere that we want to get to. The question is, will we feel emotionally complete about where we get? Yeah, I think there will be plenty of resolution. I just think that the resolution may end up being not exactly what we would like to see. I mean, I foresee this as not being a happy ending.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any way that this turns out to Chester and Luz and the baby live happily ever after. And I mean, in one way that's sad, but I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Say again.
No, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Strangely, I think so am I. I feel like the characters now they're broken enough that no matter what happens to them, any resolution that happens will be good for the story. The question is, how are we as the audience going to feel about all of this? I don't know. I guess we'll see. Yeah. So I'm going to wrap it up there. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I know sometimes I end up talking a lot through these episodes. Kinte, I thank you so much for being patient with me.
No, I love it.
We know that Kinte can actually, as a matter of course, just interject. So I trust that he will when he can.
Yes.
So, how do people find you all over the interwebs?
They can get me at Kinte F on Twitter, Kinte Ferguson on Instagram, and of course the website is indyradio.org, indyradio.org. How can they get you?
People can find me on Twitter at followingbliss1, and you can find either of my websites at criticallaughs.com or moviesmakethemeal.com. So until next time, which will hopefully be soon, we'll see what happens.
God bless.